couple of weeks ago, the team that we're about to talk about looked like one of the best teams in Major League Baseball. But currently, going into this last week of May and into the month of June, they don't look like it. That's the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs were red hot for a good 3-4 weeks. They had not just one, guys. We're not just talking about one 10-game winning streak. They had two 10-game winning streaks where you're like, okay, the Cubs can't lose. They had that long stretch where they didn't lose at Wrigley Field, and they were flying high over there at Clark and Addison. And now they've just been in this free fall for the last couple of weeks. And currently, at the time of our recording, they've lost 9 consecutive games. Could be 10 by the time you hear the podcast wherever you are. And it doesn't look good either. The start of the losing streak, they lost 2 of 3 to the Chicago White Sox. They got swept by the Milwaukee Brewers. And then this was the bad one. They got swept by the Houston Astros. Now, going into that series, the Astros had the 4th worst record in Major League Baseball. And then they lost their game on Memorial Day to the Pittsburgh Pirates, who have been solid throughout the course of this first half. And the Chicago Cubs, it's just not going right when you're talking about how to stop this free fall. It hasn't been good, and a lot of it revolves around their offense. They have just not swung the bat well for the last 2.5 weeks. And you look at the Cubs and you look at the names on paper and you say, okay, this should be a team that swings the bat well, that hits. And since May 9th, they're averaging 2.6 runs a game. They're 28th in baseball in runs scored over the last 2 weeks. They're 26th in team ERA. And look, I know a lot of people out there will say, well, the Cubs were injured a decent amount, right? You lose Horton, you lose Steele, you lose Matthew Boyd. Those things are true. However, if you have Boyd and Steele and Horton in there, you still got to score runs. And they've actually gotten pretty decent starting pitching from the guys that have had to fill the void. Guys like Colin Ray, Ben Brown has been fantastic for them this year. But if you're barely scoring 3 runs a game, it's hard to win baseball games, and that's where the Cubs find themselves. They went from first place in the NL Central to they're now 3rd place in the NL Central, just 4 games above 500 as we sit here at the time of our recording. And I think for the Cubs, with names like Bregman and PCA and Nico Horner, who's going through it right now, like, you haven't seen him have a long stretch like this before. Michael Busch has been pretty good over the last month after his cold start to the season. Dansby Swanson has not been swinging the bat well. I understand the Cubs have had to go through it when you're talking about injuries. But for them to be the team that they want to be, yes, run prevention was a big part of it. And I think they still do that at an elite level when you talk about turning batted balls into outs. What they're able to do on the infield with Bregman and Dansby and Nico and Michael Busch is phenomenal. What PCA and Ian Happ can do in the outfield, same thing. Like, you're talking about Gold Glove Award winners all around the diamond. But a lot of those guys, whether it's Ian Happ or PCA or Dansby or Nico right now, Alex Bregman, when you have so many guys that are fighting it at the plate, you have so many guys that have their OPS below 700, it's going to be hard to be thought of or looked at as a consistent NL Central contender or World Series contender, which is what the Cubs came into this season as. Like, it wasn't just get to the postseason and it was successful. It's like, no, you did that last year. Now, after the moves that they made this offseason, their expectation was be one of the best teams in the National League World Series contender, and they just have not been able to do that. And they've had to do some soul searching. And I know a lot of times when we talk about teams in the NL Central, regardless of who's going well, and usually it's a situation where the Milwaukee Brewers are playing well, and there's always this rebuttal of, well, the Cubs are still the most talented team. Yeah, the Brewers are playing well, but the Cubs are still the most talented team. I think until we see that narrative has to go away for a while, because I don't know if as we sit here right now, if the Cubs are the most talented team in the National League Central, right? Like, I think when you look at what the Milwaukee Brewers, who also had injuries of their own. So even when you talk about that side of it, like, they've had to deal with it as well. They've just dealt with it more in their lineup than in their rotation. But, they've lost Brandon Woodruff for a chunk of time this season. They lost Jackson Chourio for the first month plus of the season. They lost Christian Yelich for the second month of the season going into May. And so, yeah, I think when you look at the National League Central, it's not just – sometimes it's looked at as the Cubs' division to lose. I just don't think, based on how the Brewers have played over the last decade, if you can honestly just say that. Do I think the Cubs are going to play better baseball than they've shown over the last 2.5 weeks? I do. At the same time, I think some of these big names that they have in their lineup are going to have to show the back of the baseball card, right, where they play up to their career averages. Otherwise, the Cubs are not going to be a team that is looking to make a move at the deadline. They're not going to be one of the best teams in the National League, and they're not going to be able to be World Series contenders. But, the Chicago Cubs are in this bad stretch. They haven't been in a stretch like this since 2022, when you're talking about a 9-game losing streak, trying to keep it from being 10, or if you're listening to the podcast and it's 10 already, trying to keep it from being 11. Maybe they're off the schneid by the time this podcast drops, but maybe they're not. And I know for a team that has looked in a lot of different directions, they've promoted, a couple of their prospects to the big leagues looking for some type of spark on offense. They're going to have to find it from somewhere, because things can spiral on you really quickly. And I think the Chicago Cubs are learning that in real time. Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode of The Relay with Russ Dorsey. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have a question for me, be sure to drop it in the comments below. And we'll catch you again here next time.